It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. Again, if you create that mindset that we're responsible for creating ourselves, that we can achieve and accomplish anything in the world that we want.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Heroes Like You podcast, where we explore the lives of people just like you and I who've had to overcome difficult challenges in their lives and have gone on to accomplish great things. My name is Joe Belliston, and today's hero is Bill Schuffenhauer. Bill is an Olympic athlete who in 2002 helped the U.S. Bobsled team win a silver medal, but the way he got there is really unconventional. In this interview, Bill tells his story about how he was able to come from a life of living on the streets to becoming an Olympic athlete. Bill is really one of my heroes, and I feel really honored and blessed to have been able to sit down and learn from him. He's really genuine, and he has a heart of service. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Bill Schuffenhauer. Well, Bill, thanks so much for taking time to come on the podcast and share some of your story and your thoughts with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, my pleasure. You are one of my heroes, and so I'm very honored, a little intimidated to be in front of you right now, but I'm excited to learn from what you have to say.
This is fun. I always get a chance to tell people, there's a quick story. I remember when I graduated high school, and, when you're sitting around and you're signing autographs, and I had a bunch of my friends and teachers always tell me, like, remember us when you make it big. And for whatever reason, something popped out of my head. I was like, remember me if I don't, because I'm always just going to be the same person I was back then.
Yeah.
And it's never changed.
That's awesome.
Staying true to who you are as a person, just always is rewarding and keeps all your good friends and families around. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons I started this is because, to realize that everybody's the same.
Yeah.
They've all started in the same place. People have different circumstances, but really everybody's the same at the core,
yeah.
right? And everybody has the chance and the ability and the opportunity to become whatever they want to be.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I've been, lucky and blessed enough to lead a pretty interesting life. And, I had an opportunity several years ago. I was speaking at a Verizon corporate event. And after the event, I opened it up for a Q&A off stage, and a lady came up to me and she's like, "Oh gosh, you're so amazing," and just, throwing all these accolades at me. And I said, "Hey, I really appreciate your comments." And I says, "Well, what is it that you do?" And she's like, "Oh, nothing, not a big deal. I'm just a teacher." Oh. And I said, "Hey, don't take away from what you've done. Like, being a teacher is more important than you must realize, because if it wasn't for you, a teacher, I would have never been the person or been able to become the person I am today, because it was help from my teachers that helped me overcome some of the things that I did." And so, going back to what you're talking about, everyone has a chance to do whatever they want to do, but always give credit to what you are doing and what you've achieved.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so you're currently a speaker, you're a consultant, you're a coach, you're helping people build their life, and one thing you talk about that we'll get into later is building a life by design rather than by default, and we'll get into that. But the feather in your cap is probably your Olympic silver medal and your days in the Olympics as an Olympic bobsledder. But that didn't come easily or by chance. And I remember a story you tell about maybe it was your first run on the bobsled in the 2002 Winter Olympics. Mm-hmm. And the announcer gets up and says, here is the U.S. Olympic bobsled team. And team member 1, has all these accolades, has all these scholarships to these colleges, was an athlete. And team member 2 was this and all these wonderful things. And Bill Schuffenhauer, the kid who grew up on the streets of Salt Lake. And that didn't sit well with you. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, for someone who's finally achieved their dreams of making the Olympic team, and not only making an Olympic team, you're making it in your own backyard here in Salt Lake City, where all your family, your friends are. And so for me, I looked at that as a moment to really shine. And so I was just like, sucking it in, and everything that came out was just glorious and amazing. And so when the announcer announced that, I was like, what? Like, wait a minute, because I had accomplished a lot of things to that point in track and field, running for the U.S. national team. And at first I was really frustrated, but then when I let it process, I realized that probably was one of the best things that they could have done for me, because it gave me an opportunity to tell my story on a global platform that this kid who literally grew up on the streets of Salt Lake City, overcame all those obstacles to eventually make the Olympic team and set history, not only for his country, but for his his own self and for his family by winning an Olympic silver medal. So it was frustrating at first, but again, to this day, I'm still thankful for that comment because it's given me a lot of opportunities to help change a lot of other people's lives along with my own.
Cool. Well, let's get into that then. How does someone who ends up winning an Olympic medal end up on the streets, eating out of garbage cans, homeless, in and out of foster care? What's your childhood story? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been out there, for a while, but I was a typical kid who grew up with a family, a mom and a stepdad. Never met my real dad. I still haven't met the guy, even till today. I haven't met him and barely even really know his name. But, my mother and my stepdad, just led a life of, crime, drugs, addiction, alcoholism, living a street life, just part of the program of welfare and things like that, bouncing from house to house, getting kicked out. And that's just what I grew up in. And for me, that was normal. I didn't know anything different. And so I kind of continued following the footsteps of what I was just exposed to for the most part. And, I was getting in trouble. I was, running around with gangs. I was doing drugs and drinking at a very, very young age, even with my parents at the time, and just living that lifestyle because, again, that was normal. And, getting, taken away by the state and living with my grandma and going back to my mom and living on the streets. It was just kind of a real bad, vicious cycle on a, regular basis. And there was one time that, my mom had got in trouble again and went to jail and along with my stepdad. And the state was going to take me away again. And, they gave my grandma an option again to take me in or else I was going to go to my 18th foster home.
Wow.
And my grandma had actually moved up to Roy at that point in time, Roy, Utah. So she ended up taking me in, and I moved from, the life I knew here in the Salt Lake Valley up to rural Roy, Utah. And it was a big change for me because at the time I was, honestly the only kid of color. Definitely didn't really fit in, if you want to quote unquote say fit in. And it was just a lot of like, wow, what do I do now? I'm living with my grandma again. I've done it before in the past, but now I'm in an arena that I'm just not familiar with. Because when I was down here in Salt Lake, going from foster home to foster home, or when my grandma lived in Midvale, I still had my people close to me and friends and stuff like that. And Roy was just way out of the way. And so I really had to take notice to try and figure out like, what can I do to fit in and be accepted. And it was the first time I've ever experienced being in an arena, if you will, that was very different from the life of downtown Salt Lake. It was around a bunch of kids who were always happy, always wore nice clothes, always attended school, wasn't a whole lot of trouble, had great families. And I really took notice to that. And more importantly, I eventually took notice to a kid that, a lot of people know, I've talked about him in my documentary named Jake Schultz. And he was that all-American kid that everyone liked, attracted all the right people. He just had that energy that you're like, wow, it was very attractive. And I was like, I want to know what that feels like, And so I started just kind of taking notice to him and what he did and some of the things that, he did on a daily basis. And one day I followed him out after school, and he's out there with a bunch of other kids, and, they're doing all these different things, passing a baton, jumping over bars, and running around this thing that I didn't know what it was at the time. And I was like, man, that looks like a lot of fun. And I'm used to doing that. I've run from cops and jumped fences and stuff like that, right? And so, that was probably my first time in my life I utilized a negative experience on how I grew up to turn it into something positive, and didn't use, life as an excuse, because I wanted to be able to change my stars for the most part, and not live that same lifestyle that my mom was putting me through. And so, next day I went out and talked to the coaches, and they're like, oh yeah, come out. And had no idea, what I was in for, but just was like, hey, let's give this a try. And, it might be an opportunity to be accepted, with all these kids. And right away, I was just really good at track and field, just a natural because of my past experiences. Either that or I just had a natural ability. But I had fun, and it was the first time I had done something that I just really had fun and felt like I was a part of something and belonged to a group. And the problem was then that early is that you've heard that term that you can take the kid out of the streets, but you can't take the streets out of the kid, and that was my situation. And as much as I was enjoying track and field, I noticed kids over there playing baseball, and that's something I'd seen on TV, and I was like, oh man, if I could get a chance to play baseball on TV, that would be cool. So I went, one day I went and did baseball tryouts, had a great time, was doing really well at it. Next day came back to track practice, and the coach had asked me where I was. And I told him I was over at baseball practice. And he was like, well, in the sport of track and field, we're a team and we communicate. And that's where the street came back out of me. And I had a few choice words for the coaches that didn't resonate well. And fortunately, I say fortunately, they kicked me off the track team. And I basically said, hey, I don't need your help. I'm going to go and try out for the baseball team. So the next day, go try out for the baseball team, continue my tryouts for the baseball team. And I didn't know that the track coach and the baseball coach are good friends. And so you can all tell where that ended up going. So I ended up not making the baseball team either. And, big learning lesson for me. And so I had to, take a whole nother year to really think about what I was trying to do and kind of gather myself and almost do what we know now as kind of an after-action review and realize that was a huge failure. And so the next year, really try to get my stuff together, along with my grades and my education, and relied on my teachers to help me, but really committed to the goal and the plan that I was about to take on. And ended up next year making the track team my ninth grade year. Had a great time, a lot of success throughout the season, and that was my first taste of real success in the world. So,
well, that's an incredible story. How you mentioned Jake Schultz was a friend who you wanted to emulate. You wanted to be like that, which is interesting to me because a lot of times, I see this in myself, I see this in a lot of people. We look at someone and wish we could be like that, but we never take notice of how they became like that and start applying those principles. But it sounds like not only did you wish to become something that you weren't at the time, but you took actions to become that.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I talk a lot about right now. I have a quote that I created several years ago that dreams are only dreams until we take the actions to ignite them. And that quote came from me reflecting back on when I was that kid, because I could have just looked at him and been like, oh, wow, I wish I could have been like him or anybody else and just not done anything about it. But I really kind of looked into it and started taking notice, like I said, in what he was doing and how he acted on a day-to-day basis, not only, just generally, but how we interacted with teachers and coaches and other schoolmates and stuff like that, and just tried to emulate that. And for me, it ended up working really well because I did actually take those actions and just didn't let opportunity pass me by. So, well,
you've hinted that it took a little while.
It's a continued practice.
Yeah,
that's one thing that I really try to get through to my clients, that whatever it is that you're trying to do, you have to continually practice it.
Yeah.
And
well, how uncomfortable were you? Was it comfortable for you to do that? Because that sounds like it was way out of your comfort zone to start making these changes.
Yeah, completely uncomfortable. Again, because I was stepping into a world or an arena that I had no idea what was going on. Yeah. I didn't understand. I remember the first 100-meter race that I ran at Ogden High School, my ninth grade year. And I just remember asking, okay, what do I do? And they're like, okay, he's going to say on your marks and then get set. And this is what you do. And then the gun's going to go off. And when the gun goes off, you just take off and you try to get down there across that finish line as fast as you can. And, we go through the process and we run. And I held my breath the whole way during the 100-meter dash.
How'd that go?
And later on, one of my teammates or my coach, I can't remember who it was, is like, hey, did you hold your breath for the whole race? I was like, yeah. They're like, well, you actually want to breathe. And so again, going into that world was very, very foreign to me. Mm-hmm. And again, that's something that I try to get across to my clients when they're trying to do something that, for you to take that step forward, we sometimes have to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. And it doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's definitely going to be uncomfortable because it's something different than you're used to.
Yeah. Well, let's skip ahead a few years. You said you found success in track and field, and you started to get really, really good at it. You got scholarships to run in college, and soon find yourself as one of the top athletes in America in track and field. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you then wanted to set your sights on the Olympics in the decathlon. Is that right? Now, real quick, what does the decathlon entail? I mean, these are the best athletes, in my opinion, best athletes in the world.
Yeah.
They can do it all. And so what is that, and why were you crazy enough to think you could do it?
Yeah, and that's kind of that was the one of the catalysts for me to actually continue to pursue that is that when I went into high school, the coaches said, "Hey, we noticed in junior high that you were doing all these different events," because I was doing the 100, the long jump, the discus, the 4x1, all these different events. And when I got into high school, again, mind you, I was trying to change my stars and do something that I wasn't expected to do. The coaches were like, "Hey, we want you to do this event called the decathlon." And I was like, "Okay, well, what is the decathlon?" And they're like, "Well, it's consisted of 10 different events." And right away I was like, wow, that sounds like a lot. So they started naming it off. The first, it's a 2-day event. First day you do the 100, long jump, shot put, high jump, 400 meters. Second day you come back, you do the 110 meter hurdles, discus, pole vault, javelin, 1,500 meters.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, wow, that is just way too much, and they're like, "You're the first person to practice and the last one off the field." And I was like, I don't think that's something that I want to do. So I initially I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. This is just way too big of a commitment for me.
Yeah.
And at the end of the conversation, they're considered the very best athlete in the world, and I was like sold. I mean, it literally went from I don't know to like absolutely. And again, because I was trying to find my passion and my avenue to change, who I was. And so again, when I hear the best person in the world, that's what sold me.
That's what you want to be.
So that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to take this kid that no one ever expected to ever make it past 16 and accomplish significantly more than anyone ever expected. And so that's what gave me the energy, the passion, the thought process, the mindset to be that crazy to pursue being a decathlete.
Wow, that's cool. So you start training for that, and did you make the Olympic team then, or did you?
No, so I had a very good career in track and field, throughout college, had several national rankings, made it to all 4 NCAA championships. And the goal eventually, obviously, was to make the Olympics. And my first shot at that was the 1996 Olympics, and I moved up to Moscow, Idaho to train with the very best. At the time was Dan O'Brien, if you remember the Dan and Dave commercials from back in the day. And so I trained with Dan O'Brien, a big staff of other athletes up there from all over the world. But I was too young. I was still only around 17, 18 years old at the time. And so at that point in time, knowing that I didn't really have a good chance, I really set my sights on the 2000 City Olympics. Spent 2 years in Moscow, moved back to Ogden, Utah to train with my college coaches from Weber State to pursue that. And everything was going really, really well that year. My first competition up at Utah State, funny enough, I scored, just over 8,000 points. So I was the first American to score over 8,000 points that year for Olympic year. Did another competition. So that first competition actually placed me number 1 in the world at the time.
Wow.
Early on in the season, but it was my first, real big ranking. A few months later, we did another competition. I scored just over 8,100 points. So I was the 51st American in history to go over 8,000 points. But that 8,100 still kept me in the top 3 in the world. And so this was the time when everyone's like, oh, it's finally going to happen. Wow. He's actually doing it. And, I just really committed. That's probably the biggest difference is I really, really committed to the sport and my health and my nutrition and my mental mindset and working, with my coaches on a regular basis, just in deep. And so already qualified for Olympic trials. Everyone was excited. We knew this was going to happen. And, the coaches and I decided, let's do one more just tune-up meet or tune-up decathlon 2 weeks before Olympic trials. And I was like, okay, sounds like a good idea. Just to fine tune things that, we wanted to work on. And we could go into the competition really relaxed. And went down to BYU to do the BYU Invitational Decathlon and, run the 100 meter, nothing amazing, just, getting points. We didn't care how we finished. And get to the long jump, which is the second event. And it happened to be raining that day off and on throughout the day. And I'd already got my marks, ready to go, running down the runway for my first jump. And my heel hits the track and starts to slide. And then my spikes catch the long jump board, which my foot had already rotated. Oh. And you just hear this almost of an explosion. And, I almost flipped, head first into the sand. And there was this massive, just excruciating pain in my ankle. And, coaches and athletes come running because it's like, that looked really weird and it sounded really weird. Yeah. Like, what happened? So they all come running and I'm just laying in the sand in pain. And what basically what happened is I twisted my ankle to the degree like I couldn't even put any pressure on it. And we ended up going into panic mode at that point in time. And, it's looking back now, it's like, wow, we didn't even have to finish the event, and we could have just been done, rested up, did some rehab and recover to get ready, for Olympic trials 2 weeks away. But we went into complete panic mode, and we were like, okay, what do we do? So we, went to the trainers. And I'd had issues with that ankle before too.
Okay.
I'd sprained it doing the same thing in Germany a year before that at the USA versus German Decathlon Championships. And so we did the same thing. We numbed it up, wrapped it up into a cast, and was like, okay, hurry up. We got to get ready for the next event, was the shot put. So our focus went way off kilter of what we were there to do in the first place. And so, we're like, okay, now we got to get points in the shot put. So we put ourselves back into the mode of like, we need to do this to qualify for Olympic trials, but we'd already done it.
You'd already done it, yeah.
And so I go and do the shot put, which it was very difficult because I was a rotator. And so that was my spinning foot. So I couldn't rotate on it. So I switched back to the glide and just got I can't even remember how far I threw. I think it was like 39 feet, and I was like a 50-foot shot putter, right?
Wow.
And so we get through that, and the next event is the high jump.
And you can barely run.
Yeah, I could barely even walk. And so, this is conversation again that I have with my clients is like, anytime you run into some kind of chaotic moment, just stop and take a time out, because this is a perfect example of just going into panic mode and how much more disaster was created. So again, we tape up my ankle even more, and I'm trying to get my steps. I'm just struggling, right, to even get my steps. And my first jump, again, I go to take off, and it's just like a bomb goes off in my ankle. And I, jump and just blow right through the bar. And we even started low. I was used to starting at like 6'2", and we started at like 5'6". Like this is something I could literally stand there and just jump over. But again, going into that panic mode. And I go through all three attempts, and same thing, just blow right through the bar. And I remember laying there, as clear as I remember the bar is like I'm laying on top of the bar on the mats, and tears just start coming, rolling down my eyes. And at that point in time, I just gave up. I was done. I was just so frustrated, disappointed, hurt, just devastated emotionally. And I've eventually, and the competition's going, I'm just laying there, and they're waiting for me to move. And, obviously coaches and staff and stuff are like, hey, are you okay? And I'm not even responding to everybody. I'm just in tears. And eventually I get up, and my coach is there, and I said, I'm done. And didn't even get like all my gear. I grabbed my bag that I had, my competition bag that I had there, and just walked off the track and went home. And that was my basically exiting out and giving up on myself in the sport.
So what was the plan after that? I mean, your Olympic dreams just got shattered. You worked your whole life for that.
Yeah.
And so now what?
There was no plan other than, at the time I had told my wife at the time that if I didn't make the Sydney Olympics, that I was going to go back and finish school and get a job and be a quote-unquote regular family. Because I was traveling a lot even for track and field at that time.
Right.
And so that was the plan. And, I was just done other than that. And, fortunately enough, the universe was kind to me, and somebody who knew somebody that knew somebody else that drove bobsleds. It was really like one of those, it was that odd, said, hey, how cool would that be if you did the Olympics in Salt Lake City? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I had absolutely no clue. And I was like, no, the Olympics are in Sydney, and I'm not going to make those because I injured myself, and that dream's over. So, this conversation happened a few times, and, they explained a little bit more about the sport, and they're like, no, the Olympics are here in Salt Lake City, and there's a sport called the bobsled that a lot of track and field and football guys go into, and you would be really perfect because you're fast, you're strong, you're powerful, you have the right build. And so, I then sat down with my family and my coaches and like, what do you guys think about this? And they're like, I don't know, like, you haven't been, sport you don't know anything about, but you're a great athlete. You've got a great mindset, and in reality, the goal was to go and make it to the Olympics. Doesn't really matter what sport it was. And I remember sitting there and, thinking, what is my family going to think? Because this is like a whole nother sport, right?
Right.
And this is like crazy talk. Like, you're going to go try and do a sport you don't even know anything about. And then, I said, well, how cool would that be? Like, if we could actually pull this off and create the story of this guy who grew up on the streets of Salt Lake City and then go to the Olympics in Salt Lake City. And we were like, oh, yeah, that would be really, really cool. Like, it's a year and 3 months away. I had to get the blessings from my family, obviously. I said, why not? Why not just give it a try? And we're reflecting back on where it started, right? You were a homeless kid that started doing track and field just to get out of trouble, and you made it work. So why can't you make this work? And
15 months away.
15 months away. And so, what I did is I was like, well, the only thing I can do right now is take everything that I had for track and field training, mental focus, experience, and just pick it up out of one bucket and laterally drop it into a bobsled bucket and just go for it and see, let's see what happens. I felt confident in myself as an athlete. I didn't have to really travel anywhere. And, it was a big learning curve, but I was able to really pick up on a lot of the training because I really, one of the things I did is I really became a student of the sport for like 3 or 4 months straight. I didn't even push the bobsled. I literally watched the athletes, watched the coaches, watched how they worked on it, reviewed a lot of film, and then when it was time for me to actually push the bobsled, I'd done enough of the, I guess the training, if you will, outside of the physical training, but just doing the research on the sport, that I could then apply like my experience as a track and field athlete to what I would watched and combine the two of them. And so the first time I actually pushed a bobsled was during the World Cup team trials in Park City.
Unbelievable. Oh my goodness. So how did you make the team, I guess is the question, because I'm sure that the U.S. Olympic bobsled team had been together.
Yeah.
And did they have an opening? Were you in competition with someone else for that, or were they begging you to come on?
Yeah, that's very interesting question, and it's all of the above, actually. So, I ended up getting to be friends with the guy who was Team USA 5. So, they only take 2. If you're one of the top teams in the world, you get a third team. But we were way off pace. And again, I was just like, we were just driving because, pushing and, working with different guys. And I wasn't very liked by a lot of the guys because, again, I came into this sport when these guys have been in the sport like their whole lives.
Right.
And, to the point where literally during one of the competitions, I had another driver ask me if I'd help push him in a 2-man race. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm looking at, all these things, all opportunities are coming. And so we're standing there with a sled on ice getting ready to push in this race. And his old brakeman literally comes up to me and pushes me out of the way and goes down with his driver.
Wow.
So I wasn't very liked. So, again, my focus was just to, stick to the basics of like put, like I said, we took everything I had in track and field and put it into the bobsled bucket and said, I just, made a promise to myself, like, let's just keep it really simple, keep it very basic and just stay focused on what we're trying to do, not worry about what everyone else is trying to do. And so we went that first year, just over a year, I was with Team USA 5 and we did some competitions, Park City, Lake Placid, Calgary. We did a few competitions over in Europe and we had the best results that driver had in a long time with me pushing both a 2-man and a 4-man. And so it was, we were pushing in a competition called America's Cup, Europa's Cup, European Cup, which is a lower level than the World Cup. And when we came back to Park City, there was a team trial race and all the drivers were like reaching out to me like, hey, we noticed that you're like doing really well with this driver, keep up the good work. And those conversations started buzzing around. I started hearing more from like the athletes and the other coaches like, hey, Team USA 3 and Team USA 4 and Team USA 2 and 1 are actually like really think that you're a really great athlete. And that started turning into like, hey, they want to know if you want to come and race with them one day, or come to a tryout, or come to a training day with them one day. And I was like, no, no, no. And I was blowing it all off. And then one day somebody says, hey, Team USA 1 is really interested in you possibly coming to work with them. And one of my good friends was telling me this, and I was like, oh, hey, don't worry. No, I'm with this team right here, and we're going to do it. And she's like, okay, here's a little bit of a reality dose for you. It's like, I know your story, and, these guys are basically offering you a Willy Wonka ticket. They're the #1 team in the world. They're favored to win an Olympic medal, and they're asking you to come on, even as an alternate at the time. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me talk to my team. And so I talked to a couple guys on my team, and they're like, oh, you should at least go see what they have to say. And so we set up a meeting with their team driver and the coaches, and they're like, well, understand, again, we have the #1 world ranking. We don't even have to do Olympic trials because we've got the top ranking, but we'd love to, we've been watching all the athletes, and you seem to be the very best fit for our team. And we'd like to offer you a spot as an alternate on our team. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, let me talk to my teammates, and they're just like, what is wrong with this guy?
Well, because this is your opportunity, right?
Yeah.
This is what you've been waiting for.
Yeah, and so, thankful that I had a good group of guys on my original team that honestly cared about me as a person. And so I went back and set a meeting with our whole team, including the driver, and we all went to lunch and kind of told him what was happening. And my driver was just furious. He's like, oh, they're always trying to take my brakeman, and, just getting mad right away. And the rest of my team, they pulled me aside, and they're like, you realize this is like your opportunity again, your Willy Wonka ticket. They're like, the chances of our team making it, even with you, is very, very slim. And this is your dream. This is your destiny. This is you changing your stars. And so they gave me their blessings. And, a bunch of grown men got together and we cried, and and it is what it is. And so, I took their recommendation and went back to USA 1 and said, I'd love to be a part of the team. And that's when, I came on USA 1 as a alternate and was announced to the Olympic team at that point in time.
Amazing. So you go on to win a silver medal in the 2002 Olympics,
Yeah.
which hadn't been done for
46
years. Yeah. I don't think the U.S. had medaled at all for 46 years, right?
Yeah.
So that was certainly an achievement. And just for a minute, what is it like going down that track? I go sledding with my kids, and I swear I'm going 95 miles an hour. So what is it like when you're going down the ice
And actually going 95?
and actually going 90 miles an hour? Yeah.
It just depends on the track. For me during the Olympics at 2002, it was just a phenomenal experience. Because again, for me, I was reflecting on everything that had happened in my life, back to being a little kid, all the way to making the decision to get involved with track, eventually to that decision a year and 3 months before that of saying how, if we could write the story, that would be super cool. And it was such a surreal moment because even while I was warming up, I'm looking at, the thousands and thousands of people, all along the track, and people chanting USA. And it was just, it was 100% like that dream come true. And not only that, you're experiencing it firsthand. And I could hear the people, the bells and this chants of USA, and it's really hard to put into words to what that feels like for that moment, during the Olympics. But outside of that, going down a bobsled at 95 miles per hour hurts.
So it's not comfortable.
Yeah, it's not very comfortable at all.
It's got to be a rush, though.
Yeah, it is a rush. Depending on the track, you're going anywhere from 75 to 98 miles per hour and hitting upwards of 6.5 G-forces of pressure. And so, while it is a rush, it's also painful, and it's a lot of strain on your body in several different ways. And then again, there's the risk factor of always flying out of the track or something going very, very wrong. So,
did you ever crash?
Oh yeah. We actually had one of the worst crashes in bobsled history in Altenburg, Germany. So
Wow.
That was
didn't
a
feel good.
painful experience.
Wow. So on the podium, what's going through your mind? So you finally achieved the dream, and then, flashbacks of where you came from and your childhood have got to be there. What was that emotion like?
Yeah, it was overwhelming. We did a flower ceremony that night up at Olympic Park, and it really hadn't hit me yet what had really just transpired. And the next morning, We're supposed to go down to the awards ceremony down here in Salt Lake City, and it's all starting to like filter in through my body. Like, oh my gosh, this really just happened. The dream and the thought of you ever becoming an Olympian and literally changing your stars is actually happening right now. And I remember walking out on that stage, and the first thing that I see, try not to get too emotional here, was my grandma, who had took me in so many times when she didn't have to, holding up a sign, and she's Spanish, so she speaks Spanish, and she holds up this sign that says, "I told you, Hito, dreams come true." And the tears just start rolling down my face, and they're just tears of joy and happiness and appreciation that I get to share this experience with all my best friends and my family standing out in the crowd. My wife at the time was in the crowd, her family, my brothers, my sisters, my cousins, everyone was out there in the crowd. And to have an opportunity to share that with them when they've been a part of my life from the beginning and they've seen it and experienced all the other bad stuff that had happened was just one of the most amazing moments of my life.
Yeah, what an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Incredible. Would you have become an Olympic athlete if you hadn't have gone through the trials that you did as a youth?
I don't think so. I think, even still today, that anytime I go through some type of trial, I understand that it is for a bigger purpose. I don't utilize any type of trials or downfalls in my life as an excuse to fail. I always look at it as like, okay, what can I learn from this situation to grow? And so I reflect back on the things that I went through as a youth as opportunities that have helped me grow to who I am today, not only as a person, but as a friend and a family member and a confidant to other people that I get a chance to work with. So I'm thankful for how I grew up because I've also had an opportunity to help change a lot of people's lives throughout the years by telling my story and sharing it. And not only other kids, but even adults, when they hear that story and they truly understand that it doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. Again, if you create that mindset that we're responsible for creating ourselves, that we can achieve and accomplish anything in the world that we want.
That's awesome. And that's the point right there.
Yeah.
You can achieve anything you want regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah.
Becoming an Olympic athlete under the best of circumstances is next to impossible. Right? I mean, less than 1% of the population is an Olympian.
Yeah.
And you did it under less than favorable circumstances. So that's just remarkable, just amazing.
Yeah, I'm actually, funny enough, not too long ago, I started creating a new talk because I've always given my talks typically verbatim on how I grew up. And I started getting a lot of questions about like the mindset, what's that Olympic mindset? And so I just recently created the Olympic mindset presentation that does talk about, the chances of becoming a Winter Olympian. Just a Winter Olympian doesn't specifically say what sport is like 0.000745%.
Wow.
So it's been, such an honor and a blessing to live the life that I have and look forward to the things and the opportunities I still continue to get to do and share that story with people just in hopes that it, resonates with somebody and helps them change their life.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this. You did the 2002 Winter Olympics, and you did more in addition to that. And then you've reached the highest pinnacle of athletic achievement. And yet, after the Olympics were done, you retired, you went into a funk.
Yeah.
You went into a dark place and decided it was not worth it and wanted to give up on life.
Yeah.
You're now an advocate of suicide prevention, but what got you to that point where you've been so high, you've achieved so much? I can't imagine you thinking that you can't get through a challenge, right? Because of everything that you've accomplished and the things that you've overcome in the past. So what was it that brought you down into that dark place?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not just unique to me in my experience. This is an issue that spreads across many different realms of athletes to the military personnel to executives to everyday people. And for me, my experience was that I was so used to traveling the world, living at a high level, competing at a very high level, a very structured life. very different than just being home and being a regular guy and working a regular job, that when I retired and came home, I didn't know how to make that transition into a normal world. And, I lost my identity as a person because I was so used to being Bill Schuffenhauer, the Olympian who won all the medals and competed everywhere and best athlete and, all these different things, that when I came home, it was almost like crickets, and everything that I was used to for so many years was gone. And again, that transition was very difficult for me. Part of the other problem is that I wasn't good at asking for help. So when I recognized that there was a problem, the athlete side of me that had overcome so many other things previously thought I could figure this out all on my own. Interesting enough, right? Like, I've had a coach my whole life, but when I faced one of the biggest obstacles in my life, I think I could do it on my own. And I was wrong. And that put me in a funk for about 8.5 years. And when I say funk, I'll throw this out there, me being as vulnerable as I can, it was a bad funk. It was, 8.5 years of bouncing from job to job, not paying child support, drinking, pain pills, antidepressant medication, partying, and just completely going off the rails and utilizing a lot of that stuff as a tool to deal with the problems I was having. And it only got worse because I continued to think that I could solve these problems on my own. And obviously that's just not the solution to that type of problem. And so it finally started really coming to a head. 2016 is probably where the pinnacle of all started. December 3rd of 2016. I bounced from one job to Ballet West and started getting into the world of development. And that's, I started feeling like I was reconnected almost, because I was helping raise dollars for the dancers, and I associated the dancers with being an athlete. And so, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I continued to still go down that rabbit hole of depression and addiction with all those things. And December 3rd of 2016, I did my very best job that I knew how at the time of taking my life. And, I did that in front of the person I was with at the time. That was just me, like, being done after 8.5 years of just absolute chaos in my life. And again, the problem was not reaching out and asking for help. And, fortunately, I survived that experience. Obviously, I'm here.
Thank goodness.
But again, it wasn't something that literally happened overnight, because I masked, it is what it is. I had a big cast on my arm from what I did, and trying to, come up with excuses, everyone who asked me, like, oh, what happened? And I, created an excuse. My kids had asked me what happened, and I was like, oh, I slipped and fell on the ice at work, and just really, like, lied to myself and just wasn't truthful and honest to myself. And about 1.5 years ago, I just really said, okay, enough's enough. And all these things that are happening to you over the past 8.5 years, the only way they're going to get fixed. And, I'm in a position where I just thought my life was just chaotic and horrible and over and no hope and no one was going to help me. And so I had a conversation with myself. I literally, I started, joining on board with an organization that I'm a part of right now called TMIC, which is the most important conversation. And they started talking about, if you want to make your life better, the only person who's going to help your life get better is yourself, and start decluttering your life, start tearing down your architecture that you built, and start getting rid of the things that aren't serving you in life, and rebuild your architecture exactly the way you want. So, build your life by design. And so I literally had a conversation with myself in the mirror in my bathroom in my apartment in Ogden. And it was the first time that I have looked in the mirror and looked into another person's eyes. I saw a completely different person, and it was like, wow, who are you? And so for that next 45 minutes, I literally had this stare down conversation with myself in the mirror and said, listen, this is something that you have overcome, in many other cases in a different capacity. You've overcome a lot of stuff in your life and you can overcome this. But again, it's not going to start unless it starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to become honest and truthful with myself and stop believing all my own BS, if you will, and started taking a lot of actions to declutter my life, filter out the things in my life that weren't serving me. That included people that I hung out with. So I ended up separating myself and detaching myself from a lot of friends I hung out with, detaching myself from a lot of the things that I had in my house that I just didn't need. I had a company that I was running that didn't serve me as well. So I detached myself from that and decided that I was going to make a big move. So I moved from Ogden back to Salt Lake City. And that's at the time when Brett Lechtenberg and I started a relationship and kind of attached myself to him as a mentor to kind of help me through this transitional phase. And, with that, I was deciding that I was going to make a huge, powerful transition in my life, and I did.
You started over.
I started.
You got rid of everything and started
over.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's the reason that it had to happen that way, because again, I'm used to just always doing things to extreme, is that I wanted to make sure that when I talked with my clients that I was talking from firsthand experience. It wasn't just something that I read in a book or somebody told me. Like I can tell you like the deep, dark depressions that I went through, the thought process that I had, all those different things from firsthand experience, but then, having an opportunity to now tie it to, more educational side of things to be, what I do today is, mentoring and coaching people and stuff today. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
The chief reason for this podcast is to help people realize, like we've talked about, that they can become whatever they want to become. They can get through whatever they want to get through. But suicide rates are the highest they've ever been right now, and the ages are getting younger and younger. And what would you say if you were one-on-one with someone who's struggling with suicide temptation and ideology, and they think life's just not worth living? How can you help them understand that it's going to get better? There's light at the end of the tunnel. And if you just keep going, that things will get better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you're talking about, it's up to you. But my word, when someone's that low and that dark, it's really hard to, to convince them otherwise.
Yeah. And that's the hardest thing. And, I don't know if you know this as well. I have a nonprofit that I'm starting called thepowerinu.me.
I did not know that. That's cool.
That deals with suicide, depression, and addiction. And I'm thankful that, the team that's coming together with that are some of the most inspirational people in that industry that deal with those types of things. But, the whole idea behind that is that it's not that we as a society are not talking about suicide and depression and addiction. We all talk about it. We all talk about how we want to help and so on and so on. The problem is, just like you mentioned, is how do you get those people that are in that space to actually talk about it? And so, for me, you have to come from a place of like truly caring. And, I know, again, my personality is I didn't want anybody to talk to me about it because as far as I was concerned, I wasn't depressed. I didn't have a problem. And that's obviously not the truth. So to truly say, okay, let's figure out what is really the root problem here. Because I think we try to mask a lot of stuff and don't really go to that root problem. So trying to get with somebody and hopefully help them open up enough to really start communicating that. But obviously, they have to be in a safe place to want to do that too. And I have a client right now that we deal with that on a regular basis. Wow. And it's a day-to-day effort of conversation. And, you have to be extremely careful on how you have those conversations with these people. Again, because I was one of them. And I wish I would have had a me. I kind of did, I guess, but me that would have helped me out, way earlier on and said, listen, we can cut this off early and you don't have to go through 8.5 years of chaos with the end result possibly being, what it is that I did and trying to take my life. And so, there's not an answer for everyone. There's not one thing that's going to be like, okay, here's the answer to like solve this problem. It's truly, you have to get to understand that person, where they're coming from, what are the issues in their life. Because I've had an opportunity to work with some people where they took something very small in their life and made it really big, much bigger than it was. And when we had a chance to sit down and talk, break it down and say, okay, let's get some clarity on this and what's the problem and help them create a solution to that problem. And they realize, oh, wow, like maybe my problems aren't really that big. But then you do, in some cases, you have some people that their problems are really that big. And, you know, my case, my problems were pretty big. I created a big, deep, dark pocket that I had crawled into and just continued to swim in on a daily basis. And so, you know, the less complex you can make it, I think it's very helpful as well.
Yeah.
But just making sure that you're coming from a place of like truly caring,
Right.
you know, because I've had people in my life who are like, hey, anytime you need anything, like just reach out. And like, you know, I've reached out and they're like, they weren't there. So you also have to have that capacity, you know. That's I think a big one too, is having the capacity to help somebody out in a situation like that.
I love what you said. Yeah, you really have to care. You have to find someone who cared. And in your life, I mean, you've talked about it at length. You had, I believe his name was Jake Schultz. Your grandma was there. And then when you were going through that time, you said you didn't want anybody there, and you see how well that went. You mentioned you were hanging around with gangs and things like that. In your opinion, how important is it to have good friends and to be hanging around the right people?
You know, I have a good friend by the name of Dan Clark. I think you know who Dan is. He's one of the top motivational speakers. He's a contributing author to all the Soup for Your Soul books. But he talks a lot about, you know, you become the sum of the 7 people that you hang around the most. And it's so true. And, you know, I didn't really know what that meant because I knew, like, when I made my transition, I had to step away from my gang friends because I realized if I was hanging around them, I was going to continue to do the same things that they were doing, and they'd pull me in every single time. And so, you know, that's the difference. It's like, what are those friends doing on a daily basis, and what are your quote unquote good friends doing? And you know, I think you might also have a person who's in a gang who might be your good friend. So it realistically goes back to like, what are those friends doing in life? And what is it, more importantly, what is it that you want to do? You know, instead of trying to make all these other people happy, what is it that you want to do? And then, you know, for me, I wanted to be a successful speaker, be a successful coach, successful mentor, have a successful nonprofit, and just overall be a great guy that comes from a place of service. And so I decided to surround myself with those types of people, which you had an opportunity to meet a few of them through Operational Limitless, Brett being one of them, Sal and Mark. And, you know, I've now created a circle of friends that I know hands down, I could call them at any point in time, and they would be there for me. And they all come from a place of service where they really are out to help other people and give back. Right. And so I've now been able to elevate my game of what I do now to a level, you know, take my experiences that I've had over the years and you know, intertwine that with what I'm doing now and just really create just something really cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank goodness for everything you're doing. And man, I appreciate you being here, for sharing your story. You're so inspiring. Man, if there's someone I want to be like, it's Bill. So I, again, just really, really appreciate it, and good luck with everything. Wish you the very best. If someone wants to get a hold of you or contact you or needs your services, what's the best way to reach out, and how can they find you?
Yeah, easiest way is just go to my website, olympianspeaks.com. You know, it just depends on what they want. If they need, you know, somebody to speak at an event, or they're looking for a mentor and coach. I've been lucky enough to build my architecture by design to where, you know, now all I do is a lot of, you know, speaking events at all sorts of levels. And I consult everything from individuals to athletes to executives, and just currently joined on board with a technology company where I advise the technology company.
Very cool. Well, so final question. How old were you before you could spell your last name?
That's a good question. I remember as a young kid in like second grade, like, oh man, my name is so long. You know, from what I hear, they don't teach cursive now. So I remember back then trying to write my last name in cursive, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I need like 2 or 3 pencils to get through this.
Well, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. It's not every day you get to sit down with an Olympian, and I feel really blessed and fortunate that Bill was willing to take time and share his story with us. You know, statistically, Bill didn't have much of a chance to accomplish anything in his life, and there weren't a lot of people counting on him to do so, which makes his story even more remarkable. And I don't want to recap the whole thing, but there were a couple things I want to bring up that really hit me when he was talking. The first is, be a Jake Schultz. Be someone who other people can look up to and learn from and want to be like. Where would Bill be today if Jake Schultz hadn't have shown up in his life? The other thing I really liked was, don't use downfalls and trials in our lives as excuses to fail. But rather take failures, take trials, and learn from them and allow them to make you stronger and help you grow. We all have plenty of failures that we can point out and that we run into, and maybe next time we think of them, we need to shift our mindset to think of how these can benefit us rather than use them as excuses to not continue. The other thing I really liked that he said was what motivated him to participate in the decathlon, and that was to be the best in the world. As soon as he heard that he could be one of the best in the world, he was hooked. And what God-given talents and abilities can we use to be the best in the world at what we can be, at what we can do? We should look at it that way and think, what strengths do I have that I can use to be the best in the world? And then if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling in any area of your life, it's not bad to ask for help. Find a coach, find a friend, find someone you can ask to help you get through the difficult time that you're going through. Well, a big thanks to Bill Schuffenhauer for taking time to share his story with us. A big thanks to you, the listener. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. It's a great day to be alive. We'll see you next time, and God bless.